So welcome to another edition of Through a Therapist's Eyes, where you get to see the world through the lens of a real mental health and substance abuse therapist. I am Chris Gazdick, and this is a weird show. It's a first time ever that we are doing an episode without our trusty friend, Craig Graves. We miss you, buddy. He was going to be out of town, so he's like, oh, you can do this one without me. So I'll see how this thing flies. You'll have to get used to my voice, but we are going to have another voice with us. We do have a guest. More on that in just a minute. But as you know, our goal is to create emotional growth through the medium of this podcast, being aware this is not the delivery of therapy services in any way. Feedback and discussion is welcomed on throughatherapist'seyes.com, the podcast blog tab. So this is the human emotional experience, and we're going to have to do it without Mr. Craig Graves today, but we're going to figure this thing out together. Good quick plug for books that I got coming out. A couple housekeeping stuff I want to take care of before we kind of launch. I am, and actually we'll have on the show today, a fellow book author from Morgan James Publishing. Still excited about that. Through a Therapist's Eyes, you can be emotional and remain safe unless the wise people at Morgan James decide to blow up my title. That's what's going to be going on. I don't know, here in 3, 4, 5 months, maybe our friend Lynda, who's joining us today, can tell me how long to wait and what that whole process is. But just talking about it in advance, get you guys kind of excited about it, checking it out. I think it's going to be a cool thing. Also, let me see, what was that? I couldn't remember because, as you guys know, man, the last couple of weeks was crazy for me with dealing with the business of dying, with my sister and all. That was kind of out of control. And so I'm still kind of trying to get back on my game a little bit. And thank you for all the concerns, thoughts, and prayers that you all have had out there. It's very humbling. And just from the bottom of my heart, I'm appreciative of all of that. So I do have an appearance on a podcast. I am a podcast listener because of Mr. Craig Graves. I am, I guess, obviously a podcaster, and now I'm starting to become a podcast guest. So I think you guys might want to check out some of that. It's really good content, usually on pretty good podcasts. This one was a really cool talk with, oh gosh, I'm going to kill her last name because I didn't look it up. Jamalee is her name, and she does the Beauteous Me podcast. And she listened to our Family Dynamics show and was really pretty taken aback by that one. And that was kind of our focus. So it was a little bit more about addiction and the family dynamics, and she was just she's actually a fellow LCSW as well, so that was kind of cool. It's a podcast called Beauteous Me, so that's a BEAUTEOUSME, Beauteous Me. Check them out wherever you get your podcasts. That's what they say, right? So I think that is all of the housekeeping items. Hope the audio is good too, by the way. I kind of forgot my microphone, Craig, buddy. I need you with this technology crap. I'm just doing, we're doing a Zoom platform tonight, so I hope the audio is okay. I did not, Craig. I'm sorry, buddy. I did not bring my headphones and speaker with me. So I don't know, guys. We'll see how this all goes. We have the honor of speaking to Miss Lynda Hacker. Ma'am, did I get that right?
You got it close. It's really aroused, but you did a good job with it.
Well, I'm going to spell my name and see if you can get it and put you to the test, but I won't do that. Lynda is the author of an awesome piece of work that I have checked out and can tell you it's a unique perspective, man. Thus, the topic of our show today, a mother and her son and addiction. She wrote the courageous book, it's a personal memoir, The Weight of a Feather, A Mother's Journey Through the Opioid Addiction Crisis. So she is, currently part of the Hudson Valley Community College as an adjunct professor. She sits on the board of directors with Columbia County Pathways to Recovery. She is an advocate of Friends of Recovery in New York. She also was at DePaul University for a little while as a professor, faculty member, I should say. Adolescent and family therapist, school drug prevention coordination counselor, and the department head of English at the American School of Buenos Aires. Are you from Argentina, ma'am?
Lived there 14 years.
Oh, wow. That's warm down there, isn't it?
It sure is, but it's beautiful.
I must say it's supposed to be still wintertime here in North Carolina, and I just popped on the air condition. Hot. I don't like the heat hitting us this early. Um, Before I ask you how I did with the introduction, and think about what you might want to add and what I missed, I did have another housekeeping item, and Lynda, I'll be curious what you think about this too. We sometimes do current events on our show, and I'm always on the lookout for current events and things that are kind of going on all around us. And boy, we've got some current events lately, don't we? In our
That's for
country.
sure.
What's that?
That is for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we're recording on March the 12th. It's actually a day after President Trump's address to the nation on the coronavirus. So, mental health. How about that as a mental health topic? It's obviously a health crisis that's attacking our nation. I guess it's also becoming an economic crisis that's affecting our nation. And I would maintain that it's also a huge mental health crisis across the world. I'm not going to make any news flashes by this, and I'm not sure when it'll be published. So we're probably at least a couple weeks into what our country's going to do. I'm bummed out about my Mountaineer basketball game being canceled tonight, I believe. And that's a simple thing compared to what we got going on, though. So I think that I'm not going to break any news for sure. And 2 weeks from now, I'm sure you've heard a lot about it. Hopefully, at the time that you're hearing this podcast, after it's published, we have calmed down. Because what I want to put a voice to is, taking heed of managing the mental health piece of all this. And Lynda, I would say that the mental health piece of all of this is fear and managing our fear. It's absolutely terrifying. You don't have to have OCD to be afraid of a germ that's flying around in the air, right?
Absolutely.
Tell me what you think about that.
Well, I was amazed. I stopped at the supermarket today. It's a work day in the middle of the day. And usually if I go at that time, there's one or two people there. It was packed. And it was not packed. It was packed with people with huge baskets filled with things, toilet paper, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand that, but apparently that's now trending. Everyone's doing it. But it was just such a shock to me. I went to the local pharmacy. There's a big sign. Please note, there's no more hand sanitizers or masks here.
Wow.
It's like, what world am I living in? A month ago, none of this was really going on. And of course, as you mentioned, I teach at a college, and we're continually getting notices of, has anybody been impacted and what are we going to do? And we're going to basically, from this point, be teaching online.
Right.
So, it really has changed many people's lives. In my life, in a minimum way, but for other people in a major way. And I was amazed at one of the things that came out in one of the Newsweek magazines today about, what about the homeless? If a homeless person has to get quarantined, where do they go? There's lots of aspects to this that if it doesn't touch our own lives, we tend to ignore, but they're really significant.
Yeah. There's so many aspects of it from a mental health perspective only, let alone a medical and an economical and a world relations, foreign relations. There's just so many things going on with it. And I feel like, you're right, the disadvantaged, the homeless, they're shutting down college campuses and, mass chaos is happening. What happens to the students who don't have anywhere to go? Well, the college says, well, we're not going to close them down and shut them out. Well, had they even thought of that? It's, family members that are trapped overseas with a, travel ban from Europe, or they're going to block us out of coming home, or they're not. I feel like I just want to put a voice towards, prudence, pay attention, follow the medical information and the advice, take it seriously. A lot of people are like blowing us off, and that's a problem. So arrogance and isolationism and ignorance are not, needed, but panic and fear-based behavior. We've talked about that on the show a lot. We don't need that either. I think we need prudent, decisive measures taken seriously and calmly is kind of what I'm thinking. Does that sound possible, Lynda?
That sounds like good advice for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's launch onto our show before we run out of time and maybe give everybody a break from the coronavirus, huh? How did I do with the introduction? What did I miss and what did I get? What makes you you and who is Lynda?
Well, I think you pretty much hit a lot of the things that I've done. I mean, it sounds like a potpourri. It sounds like a person who has ADHD who doesn't stay with one thing more than a few years, but that is not really true.
Right.
Many of my friends have had for many years. But I think my background points to kind of an interesting thing about the whole opiate crisis is that, I was ironically at one time a prevention coordinator. First
Right.
thing I did when I became the coordinator is I called up, I said, I want the most evidence-based program. I want the best, the Cadillac program.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. Whatever it cost, that's what we had. But you see, even putting that out there, and perhaps there are better programs now, was, not able to prevent what happened in our family, which was my oldest child became addicted to heroin.
Right.
And I can't say I was a naive person. Certainly we talked about it. I felt like I followed the formula, but the formula doesn't always work for everyone.
Dare just say no. I read that in your book.
Oh yeah, right. Dare.
It is interesting, and that's why I think the audience could really pop an awareness with this in the sense that sometimes they put us on a pedestal. I mean, therapists, listen, I'm just a man. That's all. That's what I am primarily. And, I have a lot of ignorance and troubles and reality in what it is that we face. I mean, when faced with something like addiction per se, it's tough, isn't it? When it comes home, it's all different.
For sure. You are without any kind of, roadmaps or, signs to tell you truly where you should go. And when it first happened in our family, I really didn't know anybody. It was before it had been declared a crisis. So, I mean, I went online to look up numbers. I was calling strangers saying, I need help. Can you help me? What should I
crisis
do?
of the opioid crisis, you mean?
Right. It
Yeah.
had not been, remember, it was right before the election that
Yeah.
it declared that. And then suddenly all the politicians began talking about it. But prior to that, it was still kind of in that shady little area that, it was known among professionals, but it wasn't really out there in the general community. And there were not, the kinds of community organizations and meetings and all of that exist today. So I was really lost. And I tried to follow every path that I could. And that was what was so frustrating was, in my mind, I thought, it's like any other thing, something's wrong, something's wrong. You go to a hospital, you get a diagnosis, you get a treatment, and you move on. And that's not
Right.
with addiction. You move on and on and on and on. Talking about fear, I think for any parent, the frightening thing is about it is you don't have a time limit. You don't have something that says, well, in 6 months this will be over. So you say, okay, I can endure for 6 months. You don't know how how long it's going to go on, and you also don't know how it's going to end. And I
Right.
think that uncertainty, among so many other things, really unsettles people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you just don't know what to expect. Before I forget, I want to throw out there, well, two things. One, your book needs to be kind of highlighted. Like I said, I have a copy of that, "The Weight of a Feather: My Mother's Journey Through the Opioid Crisis." I presume the audience can get that on, Amazon and book clubs and bookstores and all of that. Is that true
Absolutely.
statement?
Absolutely. Many places online and any bookstore can order it.
Cool. So, we have some shows that we've done throughout our time, and we've touched on addiction here and there. And recently we've been talking about kids, and what a more dynamic way to kind of wrap up some of our focus on children and children development and this type of thing with having a mom who's dealt with something as terrible and terrifying as opioid and heroin addiction. You'd be maybe interested to check out some of the shows that we did. We did a national debate on Suboxone and methadone and had some good information and discussion about that in episode 31 and 30, I believe. We've had some shows on early on about what addiction is and some other stories that people have had. But more recently, episode 71 on parent guilt, we're definitely going to touch on that today. Episode 75, not so functional alcoholic, the functional alcoholic term. Episode 64, addiction and family dynamics. That's probably a must listen to with, the topic that we're having today, because we know that this is a family issue and we know this is a prevalent topic, addiction, but yet there's so much ignorance out there about it. I mean, Lynda, I've worked with this issue for largely all of my career. I actually started out in, 25 years ago, or more, teaching a DUI class about addiction way back in the early 90s. And I mean, I'm amazed that even in our field, how many myths and misperceptions are perpetuated about this topic.
Oh, I run into them all the time myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's. I've already blasted it on a show, but I'll do it again. In our field, it absolutely baffles me and makes me frustrated to no end to think that there are mental health counselors that just refuse to do anything with substance abuse and refer out for that, and then substance abuse counselors that largely all totally refuse to, deal with the mental health issues. There's this great divide, and I just believe it creates a massive blind spot.
Well, mental health and addiction have sort of existed in two different rooms for years now. Yeah. And I think there's a doorway that's open, but still, I work as a volunteer. I did for over a year on the helpline. So I've got to know our programs locally, at least, pretty well. And it's amazing to me that people are sitting in programs for years and have absolutely no access to mental health counseling, unless they're forced to, say they're on probation and the probation officer says, oh, by the way, you also need this. Otherwise, it's like another field altogether, when there's so much of the research now is pointing to, not only dual diagnosis, but, trauma, underlying trauma, so many things that need to be addressed beyond the idea of, dealing with your triggers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the blending between the two is just a profound reality. I agree. It has gotten better. I've said that. It just has a long way to go. I mean, I'm still a little bit baffled why we have a substance abuse certification board and a social work certification board. I mean, what? I don't know.
I know. I hear you.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your story. Like, what happened with your son, and what are the ins and outs? I mean, it's funny because opioid crisis is something that's actually a little bit different. And I do follow a lot of the traditional substance abuse path with 12-step recovery and what we learned in the 50s and 60s about addiction and, kind of the disease model. We've talked about that a lot on the show, but the opioid crisis is a little bit odd in that, man, when somebody copped an injury and got onto this stuff, I mean, it really just got wrecked into the world like wildfire. Is that kind of what happened to your son, or what was the path leading up to realizing addiction was there?
Actually, he followed what used to be called the traditional path. I guess it's not so traditional anymore, but sort of went down the rabbit hole, starting out with drinking, underage drinking, DWI, and moved on to pot and harder things until there was a moment, and on and off. It wasn't like he was
right.
A zombie sort of thing. He was pretty functional going through school and all of that. But it was clear that there was definitely something that was wrong with what was going on with him. And oddly enough, it wasn't that I discovered it so much. He sat down on the couch with me one night and said, "Ma, I got to tell you something." And I'm thinking, oh, he wants money. He wants a ride. I don't know what he wants. And he said, "No, I'm a heroin addict. I don't know what to do." And yeah, I was like, a siren went off in my head. And I didn't want to say, "Oh, I don't know either." All I know, I'm taking tomorrow off from work, and we need to.
Yeah, right. Tomorrow off from work, right? That must have been a heck of a moment.
Oh yeah, but I in some ways, I was grateful for it because it was out there.
Right.
And it somehow, if something is no longer a secret, it's out there, then at least you're in some ways a team trying to find help. And it took us forever. And we
Yeah,
went,
it takes.
you hear stories. And in New York State, for example, 80% of the people who went to a emergency room for help were denied treatment. And we were one of those people 4 times. So
Yeah.
it was like squirrels scrambling around trying to find where's the open door that you can get in and have something, truly happen that's meaningful.
Right. Yeah, one of the things we chronicled in Family Dynamics episode is this no talk rule that kind of gets developed. And then it's funny, that was a thought in early substance abuse treatment when we started dealing with families, from the parent being the, the addict and whatnot. But when you have a child, it almost still, and it sounds weird, like if my dad has alcoholism problems and I realize I'm not allowed to talk about it, I get crushed whenever I do. It's like this pink elephant, if you've heard that metaphor, in the room. But when your child is so, how does that family no talk rule thing take hold? Is it the same or different?
Well, I guess at least between my son and I, it became pretty open. And I was the one who pretty much was driving him places and making the phone calls. And,
Well,
at least I grew up in.
I'm talking about before he has that conversation. Mom, I have
Oh,
heroin.
I guess there was secrecy. I would say, in my extended family with, say, my parents, my brother, everyone sort of suspected what was going on, but it wasn't really thrown out there as a topic for discussion. And everybody still had, it was not so bad that people were giving up hope. They were saying, well, everybody goes through these periods. My brothers went through a drinking period, and not that that's good, but it was that sense of, oh, well, it's a roller coaster ride, but all rides end. And, maybe we just need to ride this out.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, that didn't work.
No, the progression just makes it bigger and bigger and bigger, doesn't it?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, this secrecy is interesting because I haven't really thought a lot about it, but I would imagine, being a parent myself, you confront things and you talk about things and you're pretty straightforward with things, but does it, how does it ever enter into your mind, or when does it enter into your mind? Wow, like, no, my little darling here has addiction,
Well, the fact that my son had used that word when he announced it to me sort of planted it there. And then there's a period where you again scramble to try to find everything you can read, learn everything you can know about it. And I'll say quite honestly, despite what I read, it was still years down the road when I really realized I don't experientially know. I'm not I don't have an addiction myself. I don't really know the craving, and I don't know how hard the struggle is sometimes. I know it because I read it in books, but I don't have that experiential knowledge. Just like people who don't have a kid with an addiction really, truly, truly probably don't get, on how many levels you're impacted. It's not just financially, emotionally, things in your life, your own values are challenged. It really is a very deep, disturbing thing on a personal level, besides the whole battle you fight trying to, get a kid into treatment and, maintain a road that's going towards sobriety or recovery.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, it's an interesting dynamic. You're right. I mean, part of what I was thinking about is, you wonder, you wonder, you wonder. It's kind of like, is this not? I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't go through your head, but is it really directly talked about? And how do you bring that conversation up? Hey, buddy, I think you're an addict or whatnot. Because before that point, it's almost unfathomable, I would imagine. And I look at addiction. I use the metaphor as a black hole. It sucks all emotional and physical resources from that person, and then also from around everybody that's close to that person. It's a lot. It is deep.
It's a good metaphor. It definitely is. And I think if you can come up with another good metaphor, you walk out of it a different person. You come out of that hole, the person with the addiction, but everyone around them too. And that's
Absolutely.
not a bad thing. I'm not saying you walk out with bitterness or anything else. You walk out with a person with greater understanding, greater compassion, greater patience. But for the metaphor, you never step into the same river twice.
Right.
By the time you step into the river again, you've changed, they've changed, the situation has changed, and you don't return to what you were. You move on to something else, a different kind of dynamic and a different chapter as different people.
Absolutely. Listen, we did episode 25, guys, a group discussion with Jim and his story, and we chronicled Adam Brown, and he was a Navy SEAL that dealt with this. Man, Jim was on our show, and he talked about that, Lynda. I mean, he was like, man, I was that guy who would steal your stuff and lie and deceit and deceive and manipulate, and it was awful. It cost him his marriage, most things in his life. And at the time that he talked to us, talk about the hope of recovery. Oh man, yeah, we need to spend a little bit of time on that, because he was so like it was. And it was crazy because he had gotten 5 years sober at the time that he was on our show. He had just gotten a promotion, just got re-engaged with his wife, and he was moving out of town in like a week. And all of that happened like at the time of our show. It was just like, wow, right? Like things get better for sure. But I was going to say, before I forget there, the fact that your son came to you and broke that ice, boy, that's rare. That's not the typical progression of addiction for an individual's person. You must have been, totally shocked and taken back, but also I hope proud and surprised and pleased that, like, to bring that up and to bring that out that directly, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, other people have told me that it's unusual, and it's very strange to have your mother write a book about the worst time of your life. Also, and that was an interesting little journey, because I had the idea. I was actually writing another book, and this one kept gnawing on me. I don't know what another word to say it. It kept nagging at me like it needed to be written. It's like, oh, well, I don't want to go back there. But
right.
That nagging feeling didn't stop till I started writing it. And then I thought, oh, I can't do this. I can't write somebody else's part of their life in with mine without letting them in on it. So I gave them the first 20 pages of the manuscript. And I said, this is where I'm thinking. This is where I'm going. I'm not demonizing you. I'm not, I'm trying to explain it from my point of view, and hopefully, reduce stigma around it, help other parents, showcase how difficult it is to get treatment. And he was okay with it. And then actually when I got the contract, I made every single person that, my husband, my other son, my son with the addiction, everyone needs to read this, because in some ways it touches on your life. And I don't need to do this. I don't have to do this. I will not sacrifice a relationship with my family for a book.
Right.
So be honest with me. And so they did. And
you know what? I think I can speak for the world. I'm glad they did, and I'm glad you did, because really parents out there are feeling alone.
Yeah, I did. Certainly. Absolutely. But, to his credit, when I sat there with the contract in front of me and I said, okay, this is kind of the final moment. You need something, you got something to say, this is a good moment to do it. He said something that, I really respected him for it. He said, look, Ma, if you really think this is going to help other families, then sign the contract, do it. I'm all for it. We'll deal with it. And it was hard because, there's moments about his life that he's ashamed of. So we had some really kind of heavy talks about it. Heavy, not in sad, but, deep talks.
Deep talk, yeah.
About what happened. And some of the things that happened, he didn't even remember.
That's the thing.
Trivial to him, or in some cases non-existent, while they're very meaningful for me.
Well, just to pause there, that is a big factor. You know what, Lynda, I don't even think I talked about that in the family dynamics thing, but that's something that does need to be highlighted. From a family member's perspective, when you've got somebody, whether it's a spouse or a kid, but I don't know, especially your child, right? Like to watch this progression stuff happening. I mean, we got needles and physical fights and legal charges, overdosing in the bathroom, waking up with blood somewhere. I mean, and you know what? Unfortunately, we know in the substance abuse treatment world, the addict really doesn't even remember half that stuff.
That's right.
And you remember every single moment, I bet.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
That's torturous. Yeah, there's a lot of trauma that goes into that, and healing and recovery, I would imagine.
I think that's one of the hardest things that people who recover have to deal with is trauma in a certain sense of shame, because it's not like people say, oh, they've lost their values. If they don't lose it, it's their cravings. It's so much stronger that they violate it, because they don't lose it. And when they sort of, get themselves together, the shame of having broken so many different boundaries and values and principles in their own life, is a hard thing to face. Much more so than making amends to another person. This is
right.
This is a pretty intense thing for somebody to deal with. I can't, but if he said it to me, I can't believe that I was a person who would do those kinds of things.
Right. I'm working with people in my office all the time with addiction, and I mean, it's like they're just realizing they have addiction. They're doing step 1 in the 12-step program and admitting we were powerless and whatever, and all. I mean, they're staring that number, what is it, 8 down, make amends to all those that I've harmed, admit all of the stuff that I've done. Like, whoa. I'm like, well, hold on, hold the phone. That's way later. Don't worry about that, because it's intimidating, particularly to your mama, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about the title. You had said that before the mic came on. What's the title mean?
Well, it's interesting because this book existed with this title before a page ever got written. And it's an ironic title because, of course, a feather has virtually no weight at all. And yet feather is used in the Bible and literature as the sense, the wings that protect a child, the feather that covers the weight of trying to protect a kid who is seriously addicted to something is incredibly heavy.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where the irony came from it. And it relates actually to a verse in the Bible. It's Psalm 91. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. And trust is, of course, a big thing as you go through it too, because trust with your child is violated continually. But, there's also a sense of whatever relationship you have with, I would call it God, someone else might call it a higher power, is also a sense of trust when what's going on around you is just chaos.
Right. And trauma. And yeah, I guess chaos is the best word. I mean, because it just seems like one thing after the other. I know I've talked to many parents that are just like, man, every night I'm laying down just wondering if this is the day I get the call.
Right. Well, sometimes, especially, in the worst of it was like that game, what's it called? Whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
One and another one pops up, you whack another. And it's just like this ever-ending, horrible, cruel game you're in.
Yeah. For years sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
and to have no sight in end of that. I don't know if it's a Bible verse, but it's a biblical reality. It's talked about many times over that sometimes you just never know when you're entering into a storm in life, and you never know when you're coming out of that storm either. And that I heard you say earlier today, that not knowing, boy, that's tough to deal with. I mean, you just because it could be tomorrow, but it might not be forever.
Right.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you make decisions on boundaries and consequences and limits and loving somebody or all that? It's just it'll throw you in a whirlwind, won't it? In chaos.
Well, and they are guidelines. They're helpful, but they don't tell you what to do moment for moment when a crisis comes or somebody comes to your door looking for, demanding money that your son had borrowed from him for whatever. There's no rules that tell you specifically what to do in all of those little moments, and your life is filled with those moments. So, I mean, that's the other part of why it's so exhausting. I think everyone is trying, at least, the families I've met along the way, everybody's trying so hard. There isn't anybody who's in any way getting anything out of this. No one wants to sacrifice. No one wants to be, sort of treated like a doormat. I mean, no one that I've met. It's just that, you're doing the best you can with what you know. And knowing your kid and knowing the circumstances and knowing other things like, that the criminal justice system is not flawless. The mental health system is great, but sometimes you'll get someone who is not so great. And, you're not facing the ideal world. Even if you get to the door, once you get in, you're still meeting all kinds of challenges.
It's very imperfect. How old, Lynda, was he when you had this conversation on the couch?
I'd say he was 19.
Wow, early on. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Boy, this kid is awesome. I want to meet him someday because that's pretty strong for a teenager.
Well, I think he wanted to be free of all this for a long time, but just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Didn't
What
know.
step to turn, what step to take.
Absolutely. I really believe in this, from mental health, it used to be kind of a trendy thing, that strength-based therapy, where you help people see their strengths. And that's kind of, as a mother, what I've tried to do. And I'd say, like, you are the most determined kid in the world, much more determined than anyone else in the family. Can't you use that willpower that you have? And of course, that, as strong a willpower as you have, it still is not good armor against the cravings of addiction.
Right. A lot of people have, that's some of the myths. Lynda, we like to blow up myths and misperceptions on this show whenever we can. And that's definitely one of them. It drives me nuts when people are kind of like, oh man, what's wrong with this person? Why don't they just stop? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. They're the worst person ever. Like that's not the way our bodies are working completely against us, and it is strong. And I hear you mentioning that more than once, the strength of the cravings and the addiction all told, how it, have you learned about how it really grabs people?
Right.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Somebody posted, going back to kind of current events, that it was a woman, she said, if I were addicted today, truthfully, if somebody said the coronavirus is, my drug dealer has it, I would have no problem going there. If the drug that he was that he had, he just sneezed on it, I said, I wouldn't have had any problem with that as long as I got the drug. I can confront that.
So your mic kind of cut out on us. What I heard you say was, no, it's okay. I think we got good connection. But what I heard you kind of say is the person you were talking to was like, I'll go to my drug dealer if they have coronavirus. I don't care as long as they have the drug.
Right. That's right. Absolutely.
I get that. Yeah, right. Because it doesn't matter. My money doesn't matter. My job doesn't matter. My children don't matter. My parents don't matter. My God doesn't matter. It takes over emotional and physical resources all told, like the black hole. It becomes, not at first and not immediately, but progressively, it becomes the only priority, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's what should we do with this? I mean, we can go in so many different directions. I guess one of the things I really wanted to hit and ask you about was, when you look at the family and whatnot, we definitely want to talk about treatment and hope of recovery and whatnot. But maritally, I mean, you're a mom. I'm assuming there's also a dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And are you guys still all intact in nuclear family? I think you said he has a brother also.
Yes. Yeah. My husband and I have been married for, I don't know, 35 years now, and we weathered it. But there were certain things that we did along the way, which is we had made a decision that no one would make a major decision without consulting with the other one.
Okay. Good tip.
And and the other thing was that we went through moments where, as much as you like to support someone else, it was too heavy. Like you had no shoulder to give to anyone else. And it was kind of a tacit understanding. Um, you know, each of us are dealing with this in different ways. And he's from Argentina, he's from a different culture. So we
Okay.
actually had different perspectives on this. But, to say, I'll let you all help you go through it, what you need to go through in your way and your thoughts and all of that, and you'll do it for this. But we can't be really there for each other in the way maybe we would have been years ago, because it's just too heavy. What you're
Wow,
dealing with yourself is too heavy. You can't really take on too much of somebody else's sorrow.
that's really pretty
And
genuine and interesting that you would put that out there that way, and it just, I mean, that's just the reality of it, isn't it? I mean, you're right. I mean, how do you support somebody else, even a spouse, when you're kind of sinking right now?
right, I felt like we were treading water, and you'd look over to see if the other person is still treading water.
That's
You know,
good.
that's good. That's good. But you had your own battle to keep your head above water.
Yeah, that's, yeah, wow. And I think, so that leads me to believe of something I believe just all about mental health. I mean, this is why we don't rely only on our spouse, though they're our primary supports. Did you find yourself having friends, people in life, obviously maybe other family members, but were you able to reach out as a mom figuring out this 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, 21, 22 is trying for treatment and everything? I mean, did you have people that you could rely on?
I had a couple people. I had a woman who I've known, since we were children together, and she had grown up in a family with mental health issues, and her husband worked in the field, and there wasn't really anything she could do for me, but she was there for me. And I thought that, the sense, as I put in the book, sometimes you're glad people are clapping for you, especially when you feel like you're losing the game. And that's kind of, I knew I could count on her along the way, even though she had no magic to solve my problem.
That is a
It's,
great line. Can you say that again?
no, I can't remember.
You said that sometimes it's really nice to know and to have people clapping for you, even though you feel like you're losing the game. That's
Here you
profound.
are when you're losing for the game. Yeah, it's actually in the book.
Yeah, that's a gem. That's a takeaway. Because I don't think you want to be alone with addiction is probably my main point here. Like,
No.
to be isolated and alone is, you're just picked off.
Right. Well, you lose your perspective completely. What I found was it's too easy, unless you're a really gregarious person, it's too easy to just become, sort of wrapped in a cocoon where that is your world and that is your identity. You're the mother of a person with an addiction. When truly, I think it's healthier if you continue to see yourself as a person beyond that, with interests and needs and activities and goals, and goals that you may not be working on, activities you may not be doing, but you still are a much larger person than, what's being subscribed by your circumstances.
Okay, I want to transfer or transition this a little bit because I know there's a topic. Man, I wish we had more time. I always say that on a show. This show drives me nuts. We need to do 5-hour shows. I wonder if anybody would listen for 5 hours because there's a lot of good things to cover and talk about. Man, the issue of you are an enabler and codependence. I know I read several, at least like 4 or 5 chapters of your book, I think maybe it was when we were talking on the phone to set the show up more so. That's a tough thing, isn't it? I know you have feelings about that phrase.
I hate the word. I think it's a poison dart that's thrown at parents, and I think it becomes a barrier in treatment for many people. A barrier in the sense that you won't go to treatment because you don't want to be judged, or a barrier within that. And it's interesting, I did a podcast with a couple of clinicians from Boston, and that the question came up, and a woman told me that within her agency, the word enabler is banned because they feel, yeah, it does nothing to help treatment or keep people engaged. It only has a negative impact, so they're not allowed to use that. And I thought, well, that's a kind of interesting thing.
Yeah.
And there are other ways you could talk. You could talk about positive support, helpful support, not helpful support. Why use a term like that? Because it's a word that's a loaded word. It's not just a descriptive word. And it's often used by people who've never been through that situation. And I think that truly, if you're going to help a person, to kind of condemn or shame them for what's been done does not help. I think it's better to be straightforward and say, look, these are the kinds of things that are helpful, and these are the kinds of things that are not helpful. I don't know where you stand on the continuum between no, not helpful, but to talk about it in those terms and try to, see parents as allies in the treatment process, not impediments or, possible I don't know, obstacles in
Problems.
sense of problems, marginalize them.
It's funny, Lynda, I hadn't really thought of that being a bad term. I guess thinking through it right now, fresh off the thought of a therapist's head who's been working with this, I guess I wonder if the term itself, enabler, has served its purpose, because I never really saw it as a blame game, or because I started picking this up in the early 90s or whatever, and to me it was always like, exactly like you said, what is helpful, what's unhelpful, because there are some very destructive patterns that you get unintentionally really sucked into, which we use the term codependency, because it can go on and on and on and on, and the addict's life doesn't really break down. And so maybe it served its term for purpose. I never thought of that way.
Well, I think that I think in some ways this came upon the mental health and addiction world, like a tsunami. People were not prepared for it. And what they were prepared for was a model they had been taught in social work school, or, wherever they did their master's degree in psychology, social work, wherever. And it's like you can't put new wine in old skins. What needed to happen was that there should have been a model that developed that was more appropriate for what was going on. And it didn't happen because it happened so quickly. And, there's so many things that are articles that are written about, we need to change the language, not call them addicts or junkies, call them substance use disorder, and, trying to change the language along the way to change the perspective. And I think, there's a couple things that we haven't done, which is get rid of the word enabler. And the other one is that I do have a little problem with is it's a family disease. It's a disease was meant to be biological. To say it's a family disease is metaphorical. Why are we muddying the waters there?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wait a minute. Say that again. So the idea of being a family disease The disease model is that we're highlighting the biological nature of addiction, but the family disease is really
Just
metaphorical.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I
And
see
I
your
think
point
we
there.
hurt one by throwing in the other. And it's not that there are no other words. It's a family challenge. It's a family dilemma. It's a family
Definitely a
uh,
family issue. Yeah.
issue. Absolutely. There's so many. They're not exactly synonyms, but certainly they would serve the purpose. Why do we stick with that one?
Hmm.
Which I think to the world outside of the clinical world kind of makes the whole thing fuzzy. Oh yeah, well, family disease, we know it. Blah blah blah. It's too fuzzy. Should be clear cut. There's a biological um, basis for one, contributed with other contributing factors, let's say.
Yeah.
And the other one is metaphorical. It's a situation that impacts everyone that's involved. That's
Yeah.
that's the dynamic I think that needs to be put out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to lose it altogether, honestly, because one of the
Oh, I
things that
believe it.
the whole concept, needed to be, and I know you agree because I read your parts of your book where you said, one of the horrible things about recovery is that the family's not included in a lot of ways. And
Right.
boy, I mean, when we came out with intensive outpatient programs, that's intensive therapy on an outpatient basis where you go multiple times a week. It's rather intensive to avoid rehabs. But boy, I mean, when we developed intensive outpatient programs, it was a super good thing, kind of at the start of my career, where they did family programs, family directed information and interventions to manage that side of it. So I definitely don't want to lose it. Yeah. Or the,
Yeah, and I think, in fact, that's the direction we should be heading. Um, and at a slug's pace, but at least in New York, my son was involved with many different places, and I always sign the paper that says, would you be willing to participate? I always say yes. Just give me a call. I'll make time for
screaming,
you.
yes, I'm over here.
Usually sitting in the car outside because by that time he has no license.
I
Uh,
read that in your book. It made me laugh. I was like, yeah, I know. It's yeah, I can't I can't tell you how many times I've been working with somebody and I'm like, well, is your wife around? I mean, I think it might be helpful to kind of have them part of this, or your parents, whatever. And of course in my office you need to know a lot of times they're like, no, they're not they don't want to do that. Right now. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then the session's over, they go out to walk to the car. They're not going in the driver's seat.
how
They don't
true,
want
how
me
true.
talking to you
Oh
because
boy.
the story will be blown. The cover will be blown. Yeah, I can tell you it is for all therapists listening out there and whatnot. Like it is a must to get good collateral information is what we call it. I mean, we know that, I mean, there's an old saying goes, an addict's mouth is open, they're lying. And to a certain extent, it sounds demeaning and mean, but I mean, when they're in the throes of addiction, that kind of oftentimes is true. We need that information from people that love and care about this person and know them and are going to tell the truth of what's really happening.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So what about recovery? You are a part of what was it called? The You're an advocate for Friends of Recovery in New York. What is that?
It's a group that advocates, of course, Albany is the capital and the legislature is there, so deals with policy and trying to make significant changes. For example, one of the horrible things was the thing I mentioned that um, hospitals were able to say, no, we don't deal with addiction. So he looks bad. You think he's going to go overdose? It's really not our problem. Go. Here's the door. Go find
Oh,
someone else. Uh,
refer,
that
refer,
kind of
refer.
thing.
Yeah.
There was disparity in how mental health issues were handled in hospitals, and I kind of think of addiction and mental health as in many ways, I won't say they're welded together, but they are entangled.
Yeah.
But that doctors and hospitals and ERs were just kind of able to say, well, not our thing. I'll give you a telephone number. That was the famous thing. I can't help you. Oh, but I can. I can give you a telephone number. And of course, the telephone number will give you another telephone number. And so,
Yeah.
Friends of New York is able to, with partners along the way, go in and work to get things changed. So that kind of thing doesn't happen. One of the biggest problems, at least in New York State, was, when somebody says, yeah, okay, I'm ready to try treatment, treatment has to be there. Treatment can't be, well, I have an appointment in 10 days. Do you think you could come in then? Or there's no beds available now, but I think by next month we might have. It can't be that way, because we lose so many people in that underlying period. Or the other thing is to say, well, we can't get you in, so just do what you're doing right now for a while till we're able to get you in. Well, that is about the most dangerous advice you could possibly give someone.
Right. Go back to the street. Go back to your dealer. Go back. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be.
And I know personally of cases of people who died in the waiting period there. So that was the other thing, was to speed things up and make it more accessible. For example, people in the country have to travel miles and miles and miles an hour sometimes to
Oh,
get to
you mentioned the rural. You're talking about the rural aspect of that. Yeah. Right.
yeah, and there's no public transportation. Most people don't have a car, or certainly don't have a license by that point. And so what do we do? We just bring them to a therapy session and hope they talk their way out of it. So that's the kind of thing, those incredible mountains that have created difficulty for access to treatment that, Friends of New York tries to break down. And
So
do
has
that
your son been
way.
able to achieve or get the glorious gift of recovery? Is he able to be sober?
Yeah, he was very good. He was doing really well for a few years, slipped and relapsed. But after the relapse, sort of pulled himself together real fast and said, I'm not going down this road again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, what happens is, at least in his case, when he relapsed in a colossal way, you know,
Right.
with court cases and not a felony, nothing like that, but just mess. That old, whack-a-mole, a little mess here, a little mess there, a court case here, and we need lawyers here, and accidents, and so it's not just getting him into treatment, and he is in treatment right now. He's medically assessed addicted treatment. I'm sorry, medically assisted treatment, MAT.
Wait a minute.
And
I didn't catch all that. Are you say he's in treatment now? What did you say?
yeah, he's back in treatment now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He's been
Oh,
for, 3/4 of a year now. So he did have that lapse after years, and then got back into treatment, outpatient.
so how long has he been in treatment right now, Lynda?
About 8 months.
Wow, that's a long time treatment course.
It's outpatient.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I thought you got jarbled there for a second, and I thought you were saying that he went to another treatment facility, and I guess you meant outpatient facility. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So he's kind of recovering back. And you know what? I'm glad I asked that question, because, it isn't always a pretty picture that's perfect and clear. I mean, honestly, yeah, relapse is a part of recovery in a lot of ways. And for anybody that's listening out there that has a loved one or is an addict yourself, I mean, I routinely have people that struggle when I'm working with addiction that feel like, oh man, I blew it. It's hopeless, and I got to start all the way from the beginning again. No, you have learned recovery. You know the language. You know what's going on. You go back, get to your sponsor, or get back into church. Whatever it is, your process is of recovery. You're not starting over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I saw, and the second time around was not equal to the first time around. And he had an understanding of like, after he had been without it for so many years, it's like, that was so much better than this, and I'm going back there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm aware of time, and I want to get back to the enabler thing a little bit insofar as setting limits. I think a lot of people hear the word tough love. how hard or difficult or easy, because I don't want to spoil the ending of the book, but something happened really very much at the end where it was kind of like, yeah, you said no.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
I guess.
how hard was that, and how do you get to that point? And a lot of people think of tough love, how easy it is to do, and that's the answer. Can you say a little bit about your experience with that?
I think that is the most difficult thing for people, and especially parents, because you're so used to, when a kid's growing up, giving and wanting to make them happy and being part of this sort of momentum to get them on a good path, and then suddenly addiction occurs and all the rules fall apart, and yet you still have those very natural tendencies as a parent to protect and to care for a child. It's like when a child is sick, has the measles or whatever, or has cancer, you drop everything to help them, and that's perfectly okay, and everybody thinks that's the right thing. It suddenly doesn't work in the same way with addiction, and I think it's a very individual thing. That's why I hate to ever give advice to someone, because it depends so much on what you know of your own child. People say, oh, put him out on the street. I know that when my kid was in his worst situation, putting him out of the street would be like signing his death sentence. He just didn't have it. He wasn't resourceful. He wasn't capable. Um, and so I acted a certain way at that time. Later, there were times when he was more capable, and he was just, sort of like pulling the manipulation strings.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
you put your foot down, say, well, no. What do you think? I'm stupid? No, no, no. I'm not going there. Don't tell me that. Where you can really draw the line hard and fast, because you know that it's sort of a fair way to deal with him at that point. I mean, there are times when he was just broken. He was,
He had nothing left.
he had nothing left. He couldn't have made it. I mean, there were times when, said, I'll never make it. What's the point? It's like, no, you will make it. You can make it.
And
But
suicide can be a real thing, or just giving into high risk behaviors and all. Yeah, this is honestly, I almost didn't get this in the show because I would have been so mad at myself. This is honestly, in all of the things I deal with mental health and substance use therapy, one of the most difficult things to deal with is a parent to a child with alcohol and drug addiction. Which, by the way, this can easily be your daughter out there, people. This is not just boys, but I have landed on a place as best I can when it comes to this limit setting to kind of give the guidance a little bit of, like, it is okay to decrease limits and decrease giving, and say no more and more, all the way down to the point of, I'm only going to provide you shelter and food, but I will always provide that. That will never go away. Like, that is an okay thing to say. And it's also okay to go over to the other side of not providing that. And I think parents really struggle with, like you said, what are the rules? What are the limits? What do I do with this one? Is this okay, or is that okay? And am I a bad parent? That's the best landing spot I've landed on.
I agree. I mean, I belong to many of the online groups for parents too, and that's one of the questions that comes out. Am I okay? Did I do the right thing? You know, you don't need to get approval from us. It really is. I mean, that's truly, it's, what you really believe is the right thing to do. And the other piece is what you can live with, you know.
Okay. What do you mean by
If,
that?
you
Excellent
I
point.
mean, well, I'll give you an example. If a parent would say, if the worst thing happened, at least I could live with the fact that I tried as best I could to support him in all ways, financially and otherwise. As opposed to a parent said, I feel proud that I never enabled. Um, I have all my money intact. I'll have a good retirement, but I lost my child. But see, that's not something that I couldn't live with that.
Right.
I would have to go as far as I could reasonably go, and it in the sense of reasonable to help him and to help me, but it would be very hard for me to just say, you're on your own. That's it. Call me in a
Right.
few years when you get your life together.
Yeah, and that needs to be okay. I mean, that needs to be okay. And parents, sometimes, yeah, it's almost like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
That's right. That's right. There's
You
always
know,
someone who will criticize you, no matter which way you go. That's what I say.
absolutely.
It's very individual thinking.
So we need to begin taxiing in for landing. Unfortunately, I think hope, recovery. How are y'all doing now? Like, what's in the twinkle of your eye and seeing him in treatment again and all of that? Like, what is the hope that you might be able to offer insofar as recovery?
Well, he wants to go into the medical field. So he
Ah,
started studying. Well, he wants to help people, but doesn't, everyone wants to go back in the recovery field. That's not where he wants to go. He more would like, medical. Right now, he's in a nursing program, with the idea of going on to being a traveling nurse. Because he grew up in a different country, grew up in Argentina. He's spent most of his life here. He's traveled different places and likes the idea that it's something that you could carry with you and get to know different things. He's always liked interesting, unique things. I always thought that was a good thing.
yeah.
Until trying new things, until that included trying drugs, then it was not.
Well, there is that.
So that's good, and he takes that very seriously. Um, you know, he's a fun kid, but
Yeah.
he is who he is. People don't get like dipped in gold and come out perfect just because they
No,
go through an outpatient program. So,
that would be
but
nice.
he's mended relationship with his brother, and we've sort of come together, um, in a different kind of way. And while all this was going on, the rest of my family died. Unfortunately, my parents, my brother, my nephew. I mean, so suddenly, we were pretty much the only family. So we better get this together because we don't have that extra support anymore. Uh, so I would say we're on a good track, and I wouldn't say we've reached nirvana or something like that. Uh,
Definitely a whole lot different track than we were on, and I'm the hope that I hope parents can hear is that it might not be until the kid's 28 or 35 or 42. Maybe it's 22, or maybe it's what, I actually had a guy that I met very early on, years and years ago, in recovery in a 12-step meeting. He was like a 17-year-old kid, and he was fully in recovery and attending 12-step meetings in AA. And I mean, that just stuck with me, like, oh my gosh. And he was like, yeah, man, I figured this stuff out. I didn't have to go through all this crap these people have gone through. Thank the Lord, It's like, geez.
oh, geez.
Do people really do get well? Is that what we're saying?
I think people certainly do get well. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think recovery is possible, and there's so many models for that in this world that I think, we need to be sure we look in that direction too and highlight that.
Right.
And,
So what would
and
you say
honestly,
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say that was one of my motivations in writing the book, was I wanted to give hope to people, to say, your world can look incredibly bleak. You can reach a point where you can't see, what a good future would look like, and yet you make it out. And your kid goes into recovery, and you yourself go into recovery, and it's okay. It's okay, to not fall into the black hole yourself and lose that hope, because certainly that hope is there, and it happens many
Right.
times.
Many times, yeah. I mean, there are many times it doesn't. They say that addiction ends in jails, institutions, or death, and I've kind of found that to be, unfortunately, sadly, the reality. But there is an end to this stuff. People do get recovery. We had Jim on the show who was in recovery himself, and you're a mom who has seen her son be well, and I. The darndest thing of it is, I think you said when we kind of started out, you just never know when we're going to get there. Though is the frustrating thing. So keep the faith, keep the keep the hope in your heart, and keep moving, keep stepping. How would you settle us up, or end us up, Lynda, insofar as what you'd like people to know about your book, where they can find it, and having hope about recovery?
Well, my book, which I will say again, The Weight of a Feather, A Mother's Journey Through the Opiate Addiction Crisis, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, many, many places online. And certainly lots libraries have it. Not all libraries, but they can always order it. Same thing with, bookstores like Barnes & Noble. And I guess if I had any sort of final words, it would be to say, I know it's difficult for parents, at least. I know it's difficult, and it sounds silly to say have patience, so I won't say that, but hang in there. And it is sometimes a long road, sometimes a rocky road, but when you get to the end of the road, somehow the pain of the road that you took to get there fades, and recovery is possible. It's a beautiful thing. I've seen so many people reach that point and truly blossom into another whole area of their life. And for the people who are just coming into recovery, I'd say, it's important to keep that support there, and, realize that, some things will be left in the past, and that's okay. That's all right. But keep your eyes on the sights that lie ahead and the great opportunities. I've just seen such wonderful things happen with people who have trekked that road and made it into a road that's much greater and much more beautiful than they ever imagined they could live for themselves. Those are just my thoughts.
That is awesome. I appreciate your thoughts and your courage and your willingness to spend the time, coming on to our show and share your story. I did start out a tradition. I kind of like to give somebody a high five when they're sharing with us. Now we're kind of on a video platform, so here in a minute I'm going to ask if you'd clap with me. We'll give a one clap, sort of signifying a hand high five, because guys, it takes terrible courage to write a book like this and to do this sharing, and I know that you've helped some people out in the world to kind of get an idea. So let's do a high five here in 3, 2, 1.
All right.
Yeah, we call that a technical based through the wire high five. All right, well, guys, thank you for listening to another episode of Through a Therapist's Eyes, and you've got 2 therapists tonight. So Craig will be back in town soon. Lynda, we thank you again, and we wish you all well.
I certainly thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.